Very quick message before we begin. As I said in part one, there was a lot of technical issues with this episode. The good news is all of Justin's audio was able to be recorded. The bad news is all of mine was pretty much gone. I've tried to recreate the episode and give as much context as I can. Generally speaking, I think viewers will get the gist. There is a point in this episode where we start talking about, we're going through the solutions, and I start talking about how us moving to the outskirts of the UK, of England, is going to be the thing that saves us. It's where we can still be homogenous, and this is going to be the areas where we can protect ourselves the most. Unfortunately, this was said just before the news of Andy Burnham saying he wants to put as many migrants into all areas of the country. And please don't take this as black pill. Right? If anything, this validates and vindicates exactly what I'm saying, because that is our greatest strength, where we can be united, where we can be homogenous, and they understand that all well and good. So this isn't to say like, well, I guess that's lost then. No, it's to say we need to double down and we need to start acting on these things now, which is why I'll always promote people like the Woodlander, which is why I always promote groups like Patriotic Alternative. And that's why I promote people like Justin here. They have the consistency. They've been at this for a very long time. So I'm very happy to platform these type of people. Anyway, as always, all of my content you can find for free on Spotify. If you do want to support me on Substack, please do. Don't feel like you're obligated. And if you're watching on YouTube, share and subscribe. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Probably the best example we have is the United States, where we have two different cultures, two distinct peoples living side by side for the longest amount of time. And yet, what has been the benefit of that? From the black perspective, obviously this has been great. Not only do you have this beautiful country, but you also have this system which gives them the DEI. We have it the same in the UK, but we have the black community is the biggest community out of all of them, which takes the most out and pays the least in. They are a net drain on the system. So there's no benefit. And that's even before you get to all the crime statistics and all the rest of it. One of the things that's talked about quite a lot at the moment is this idea of balkanization in the US. Do you see that happening maybe?
Yeah, it is absolutely. It is absolutely. I find it very difficult to see a scenario in which the United States, as we have understood it, can survive as a single entity at this point. I think it has to balkanize because now I don't know because everybody, like I'm not a prophet. I'm a guesser like everybody else, but it cannot survive the rate of decline of the white population as opposed to the non-white population, especially where a large part of its non-white population is coming from the country right beside it, which therefore will eventually, it seems inevitable to me, is that it's going to make a territorial claim. And it seems to me that that at this stage, the ability of the United States, see, the United States military is so huge on the grand scale in terms of the aircraft carriers and all the rest of it. So when you talk about they going to invade a country like Iraq, the invasion's the easy part, to be blunt. Then it comes down to a street level. And then all this technological advantage is a moot point because it comes down to men with rifles. And it comes down to men with rifles that are more or less comparable to each other, which is to say that the American soldier is carrying a weapon, semi-automatic or machine gun, whatever. The equivalent can be acquired by his enemy. And there's no point in having F-16s because you can't, they're not of any use. They can't be targeted on a population that is no longer an enemy state. It's partly yours, partly theirs, and your people are there and their people are there. So, for example, you take a state like the California, or increasingly even Texas, and you ask yourself the question: is if California and Mexico or California and Texas were to become majority Latino and majority Mexican, and Mexico literally made a claim of annexation over them, what could the United States actually do? Okay, it could overwhelm them immediately with like sheer military force, tanks, planes, etc. But how would they maintain law and order and real governance? And you see, this was, going back to the Irish example again, this was eventually how Ireland achieved independence. We did not defeat the British Empire because by definition at that time, we're talking about 1919 to 1922, in a physical, straightforward confrontation with the British Empire, we would have lost very quickly. But what we did was we developed the tactic of guerrilla warfare, which we had somewhat learned off the wars in South Africa, but to a certain extent we developed our own abilities as well. And what finally convinced the British government to sit down and sign a document was that Ireland was ungovernable. Yes, you could hold Dublin Castle. Yes, you could declare before international law Ireland is a part of the United Kingdom. But you could not take a piece of legislation passed in the Parliament of Westminster and enforce it in County Galway. It just didn't happen. And during the latter stages of the United States so-called control of Afghanistan, it was somewhat similar. The president of Afghanistan was referred to as the mayor of Kabul, which was to say that any law passed by the puppet government of the United States in Afghanistan, it was impossible to enforce outside of the city of Kabul because it was impossible to send American troops directly into those areas. They were not safe there anymore, and the Afghan forces themselves, they are loyal to the American-backed government, never well, they weren't willing to fight for a start. They just weren't willing to fight, and the Taliban were. So you have the same scenario arising, is that where the overwhelming majority of the population in a given area refuses to recognize the authority of the government, then the reality of that government's sovereignty is anachronistic, is the only way to describe it. It doesn't exist in practice. It doesn't exist. And there are large parts of the United States now, I'm taking those two states specifically being bordering Mexico that could literally be incorporated into Mexico. But there are large parts of urban the United States where the rule of law of the United States government does not run. And there's an old English phrase, for example, the King's Writ, as it was called. The King's Writ is, in other words, where the King's Writ runs. Where the King says something is to be, and it actually is. And if it doesn't run to that area, then that's an area in rebellion. Whether anybody is shooting at anybody is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that the King can sign legislation in London, and in a certain area of the country, no one cares, right? No one cares. it is no longer part of the country at that point. Now, in the United States, there are large parts of urban America where the federal government's writ or the state government's writ does not run anymore. They cannot send the police in there either day or night, and they cannot enforce the rule of law in any real sense. And that they are run a little bit like modern Libya, some of it, like there are local warlords, or like Somalia, there are local warlords, there are local, whether they're Negro, Latino, or whatever, that control a certain area of the city. And if they say something, yes, it happens. If they want something, it happens. If they dislike somebody, that person gets killed. It happens. That's the way it works. Who is in control there? Who is the rule of law in those areas? Well, it's whoever says something and can make it happen. And at this point, there are large parts of the United States where, and of course, there's the division within American society as well. There are large parts of the country where what the federal government says and what actually happens on the ground are not the same thing. And that means you have lost control. And in Ireland, at that point, there was such a large area of Ireland where the King's writ did not run that the British government said, okay, let's sit down with the people whose writ does run and come to some kind of arrangement with those people, which is the Irish Republican rebels at the time, whereby we can establish a working relationship so that this area of on an island right beside us is no longer a danger to the mainland. So we have somebody that we can talk to, shall we say, when there are issues of conflict between the two islands, because we can no longer simply say this is the rule, this is the law. And that's how we got our independence ultimately.
With so many variables right now, because you're right, back in the day, it's just non-compliance. You know, if I don't see you as the authority, it means nothing, right? The fact that you're a king, well, I don't see you as that. You know, well, you could be a god. Well, I don't worship you. You know, if you don't comply, there's literally nothing they can do besides killing you, of course. But when you're dealing with a nation, yeah, exactly. The difference with what we have now, obviously, is this whole digital ID. And of course, you know, like we were saying, this isn't natural migration. This is all being facilitated. Of course, we can see that this is a distraction. We can see that this is an attack, is what it is. But nonetheless, we've still got to deal with all fronts because, you know, as you guys in Ireland have seen firsthand, you'll get someone from Sudan trying to literally behead a local. So you can't ignore that either. Also, in terms of what you were saying with the balkanization, I can see the same thing happening in the UK, to be honest, because the cities are gone. You know, London is like 33% white British. Birmingham were a minority. Manchester were a minority. I think it will basically be collectivizing in the outskirts, in the countryside. I think that might be the thing which kind of preserves the UK. And like you say, preserving the culture, preserving the heritage, preserving the homogeneousness of our people. I think that's going to be the only thing that really survives. That's the only thing that keeps us going. What was the thing that we were saying before? Because like when you guys were dealing with the British, what people need to remember is the English and the Irish genetically are basically the same people. And like, how long did that
for 700 years, if you regard it as over, which it isn't, because of course British jurisdiction runs to the 6 northeastern counties of Ireland. Now, not to start a fight with anybody here, but the fact of the matter is it is still the British nationalist view that those 6 counties belong as part of the United Kingdom, and it is it is heresy for an Irish nationalist to say anything other than those 6 counties belong as part of the Irish Republic under the jurisdiction of Dublin. Now, what form that jurisdiction would take, the Good Friday Agreement has kind of created a ceasefire scenario and so on and so forth. So there's that. But this issue is not settled. And that's how long it's gone on. So if you've got a situation that has gone on for 800 years without a solution, and without that either side are settled with and happy with, then you have to ask yourself, it's almost a case of, why would you do that again? Right? Why would you do it again? If you got yourself, let's put it in more human terms, right? If you got yourself into a mess in your life personally, and that went on for 7, 8 years, and at the end of the 8 years, some of it was sorted out, but there was still hanging issues that had still to be resolved within your own life. And you were offered the opportunity to try that again. Would you? Would you really? Would you really take yourself into that situation again, knowing that it's going to take this long to sort out? And in reality, probably to bring it into real life terms, you'd actually have to say 70 years of a person's life to compare to this 700 years of British rule. And you're going, in your late 70s, you're going to try it again and see if it works out better the next time, with people who are far more different than you, with whom you have absolutely nothing in common. Nothing whatsoever in common, except the basic and very basic physiology. No culture, no religion, no way of life, no history, no notion of each other at all. And it didn't work the last time. And it was with people who were quite similar to yourself, but enough different to cause that much conflict. And there's no point in pretending there is no difference either. When we talk about sameness, there's a degree of sameness, there's a degree of affinity, there's a degree of likeness. But on the other hand, there's a degree of difference as well, which was enough to create a problem that lasted for hundreds of years. And here we are with immigration now trying to do the same thing. And the liberals telling us that it is a problem that can be solved in the short run, that it is a problem of maybe 1 generation maximum. And that's the conservative point of view. The liberal point, the actual full liberal point of view is, if they're honest, is that there isn't any problem at all, even with the first generation. Now, the first generation, to be honest, wants to live exactly the way they did when they arrived, except they want the higher living standards that accompany being in Europe. And that's all. Otherwise, they want to live, the Muslims in particular, they want to live by Sharia law. They want to live according to their socio-religious ideology. And they want to impose that in the longer term. But in the meantime, even the first generation and the second generation want things to be the way they were with higher living standards. Now, they don't seem to understand that the higher living standards are as a result. See, they've been fed this thing is They've been robbed by the white man. That's why the white man is rich. That's why the white man is better off. And like that, this is something that I often remind Irish people of when they are expressing grievances towards England, but expressing them through a grievance towards English people, is, do you really think that the Yorkshire coal miner who coughed up his lungs and died in his mid-40s was oppressing Ireland? Do you really think that he was the beneficiary of some kind of largesse as a result of the British Empire at our expense? Or isn't it a fact that the financial power and the financial control of the British Empire were the beneficiaries in all and every case? And very often the British Army's intervention abroad was as a result of bailing out the commercial ventures of, say, the East India Company and the Hudson Bay Company, to take the two classic examples. There are others. Cecil Rhodes' merry jaunt through Africa was a commercial first, and then screaming to Parliament that something had to be done to protect British interests in such and such a place, and soon the British Army had to follow. So who was controlling that? Well, I tell you, if you can argue endlessly as to who was controlling it, but you can certainly say this, is that it wasn't the ordinary Englishman, the ordinary Scotsman, the ordinary Welshman who was benefiting from it. The levels of poverty in those countries for the ordinary working class prior to the introduction of the welfare state, and prior to the advances as a result, technological advances largely, that have come in the last few decades, is they were not significantly better off than we were. And so to have an animus, the Irish people to have an animus towards the English people, or the Scottish people, or the Welsh people, or as placed as a group, the British people, is to me an absurdity. And the same thing should apply, is we should look at the world question and this demographic issue and the immigration problem and things like the European Union and its interference, and in terms of who is actually controlling this, who is actually making it happen, who, and to quote the Roman phrase, cui bono, who's benefiting? Who's benefiting here? Because it isn't largely speaking the countries where these people are coming from. And it's only to a minor extent it's benefiting them personally. But the real beneficiaries is international finance capital. And if you can understand that the real beneficiaries are likely to be the main force behind making sure it happened in the first place and continues in the second place, then you're nearing the source of the solution. Once you've reached the source of the problem, you've reached the source of the solution. Because ain't nobody got up in the Sudan this morning and decided, you know what, is I know exactly how to get to London. And here is my plan, and I'm going to enact that now. It was through a series of NGOs and a series of intergovernmental organizations that they managed somehow to find themselves making that trip all that way. And when they got to England, and when they got to France, and when they get to Ireland, then there's the NGO complex, which steps in and says, here's how you manipulate the laws of these countries in order to remain, even if you have no legal right to remain. And that's the crucial part of the solution too, is to tackle the actual source of the problem, which is not to pretend that there isn't a problem. But the analogy that I like to use is that if you walk into your bathroom and it's flooded, is the first thing you do is you turn off the tap. You do not try and mop the floor. That is an endless problem. And I think some of the political solutions that are presented across Europe by the parties that are described as the far right, they are, let's mop this floor. If you mop the floor, yeah, right, momentarily you may ease a problem in this area or that area, but you will not solve the problem. And above all else, the water will flow back into wherever you've mopped again and worse. So in political terms, in economic terms, in social terms, in demographic terms, in ethnic and racial terms, we have to find where's the tap. Where's the tap? Where's the flow? Turn off the tap. Then look at the state of the bathroom and see what can be done. And this is why remigration is the word of the hour, is because mopping the floor once the tap is turned off is remigration. You can't just leave the place in the state that it's already in, because the state that it's already in is too awful to contemplate handing on to our children and handing on to our grandchildren. It's just not doable. Part of the problem here is, that people have stopped thinking in generational terms. I have 5 boys under the age of 10. So this is a very real question for me, is how their lives are going to turn out. You've got a lot of people at the end of their lives. And I mentioned Angela Merkel a while ago as the classic example of a European, an anti-European, a European anti-European is the only way to describe it. And it is not by accident that she was not married and had no children, because the end of her political career and the end of her life was the end of all existence as far as she was concerned, because she was essentially having a narcissistic personality, which was not even relieved by the genetic fact of having her own be part of the consequences. And this is to be seen throughout Europe as well, is you see European leaders without children leading countries and therefore having no concern. And on a micro scale, what you have is political parties making decisions that are not even intergenerational. They're interparliamentary is the only way that they can be described. They are focused on the next general election. And I would suggest to you, for example, is it's almost inevitable that Britain will have a general election before the end of this year, but certainly during next year. The Parliament will not run. Why? Because that's why Andy Burnham is Prime Minister. Andy Burnham was Prime Minister because Keir Starmer could not win the next general election for the Labour Party, and the Labour Party knew it. And so the Labour Party needs in a general election before it's bloody obvious that Andy Burnham can't win it either. And so that's the time frame in which politics is running now, is in 5-year cycles and shorter than 5-year cycles. It's the next general election. How do we win the next general election? Who will win the next general election? And what kind of a shine do we have to put on the way things are, presenting them to the electorate at that next general election? And above all else, ensure that there is no real alternative. Now, that is a system of government no more than Ireland had when it was had foreign rule, because you have foreign rule as well. Whether the majority of English people are willing to accept it or not is a more difficult story. But you have foreign rule, and it's Andy Burnham's whole purpose is to win the next general election for the Labour Party. And as a result, that's the time frame in which he is thinking. And that's the time frame in which your political leaders are thinking. And if I were them thinking along that line of motivation, I would shorten the time frame as much as I could, and get a 5-year parliament at least, where I had secured my own political career. If I was that narcissistic, I so that's the time frame in which, so the long-term thinkers, right, in European politics these days, the long-term thinkers are thinking toward the end of their lives. And the average politician is thinking within the next election cycle. And you can't run a civilization or a nation state on a political system that can only think within the time frame of one lifetime. And certainly you can't survive, a nation cannot survive a political system that can only think in terms of the parliamentary cycle. And we have the exact same scenario in Ireland because we imported it directly. Is we have a Dáil, which is exactly the same as Parliament. We have a Senate, which is very similar to the House of Lords, limited powers, so unelected by the ordinary voter, etc., etc. But all of it on a 5-year cycle. That's the important thing. Whereas what you need is politicians, political leaders who think in centuries. But if they could only think like in multiple decades, that would be something. You get political leaders who come into power at maybe 60 odd years of age, and their maximum political lifespan at the very top is 10 to 15 years from now.
Yeah, this is something which is said quite a lot. But I mean, you look at the UK, and this is unheard of, but we've had like 7 prime ministers within the last 10 years. And it's like, well, what practically, even if you had the best prime minister ever, practically speaking, what could you actually do with that amount of time? Not that we do, and not necessarily that the ones who get in are even working on our behalf, right? And I mean, that's kind of one of the things which is always said too, is people are just giving up with democracy in general. We can see, especially like the more stupid a population gets, it becomes less about who's got the solutions, who's got the right answers, who's got the facts. It becomes more about a show, who's got the most charisma. And it's this popularity contest, which is why you're getting more and more people actually go to extreme solutions, or at least what they consider extreme now, saying that maybe they want an aristocracy, maybe a dictator is the only thing that can save us now. I mean, I get it because situations are really quite dire. But what do you see as like the best way to govern, or what do you think would be the ideal scenario?
Well, dictatorship is very much a question of who it is, right? It's very much a question of who it is. Let me rephrase it for a moment and say what we need in Europe in general is a new aristocracy, not of titles like the House of Lords. The British House of Lords at the moment is To be honest, if you swapped them out for the occupants of the average men's hostel, right, and put ermine on them, you would get as superior a class of people, and perhaps even better. And they might even be less drug addicted and more sober. Right, that's how bad it is. Right, that's how bad the British aristocracy has been for at least 100 to 150 years. But aristocracy in general is the same. We need a new aristocracy, which means it's an aristocracy of meritocracy. One of the principles of the Clan Éireann is the establishment of an aristocracy of achievement from a democracy of opportunity. And so we need to have, because what we have under our democracy at the moment is a calcified system. But what we need to do is we need to open it up to a meritocracy, a possibility that which America had at one time, the log cabin president. You can come all the way from the bottom all the way to the top, and there's no particular reason why that should be beyond possibility. It has been beyond possibility. I don't know when the last log cabin president was, in the sense of somebody lowly born, but now you have to start. If you have ambitions to be president of the United States now, then you damn well better be born into a billionaire family, not a millionaire family. Millions aren't going to do it, right? They're just not going to do it for you. You got to be born into a billionaire family, and you've got to have the kind of connections that go with that. So that's the end of a real aristocracy of any kind. And the same is more or less true in Europe. But we need to restore an aristocracy of achievement, which doesn't necessarily mean it's directly hereditary, and certainly not primogeniture. The firstborn son. The firstborn son's often the stupidest. even in a family of idiots. And take the Windsors, for example, which I'm not going to spare anybody's feelings here and say that is a family of idiots. If anybody thinks that there is something is going to improve when Charles is gone, or that the British monarchy is salvageable as an entity which serves the British people, just wake the hell up. Wake the hell up. They abandoned you a long time ago. Now, I'm a Jacobite by political. Now, there is no Jacobite line, so I'm not suggesting you find some random Stuart somewhere with distant connections to put back on the throne. But what I'm saying by that is that that's the last time I can remember a monarchy in Britain that could be regarded as legitimate, in my opinion. But having said that, that means that you're going to have an interregnum period, at least, of a republic of some kind. And then from that, you may create an aristocracy of achievement from a democracy of opportunity. In other words, the system must be opened up to the people of the greatest talent, and they mustn't just be of the greatest talent, they must also be of the highest character. And that's what the aristocracy was supposed to be at one point, and largely was. But having said that, when I say largely was, how many centuries back do you have to go for that to be the case? Certainly the last days of the Ancien Regime in France, the aristocracy were no longer, meritocratically speaking, the cream of French society. And that was part of what created the opening for the French Revolution. But the solution at this point does appear to me that the time is narrowing for a peaceful solution, and the time is gone for a democratic solution. It's gone. Voting our way out of this is over. Now it's a question of how do we maneuver our way around that in the way that causes the least amount of violence. Understanding, and this is a very difficult thing for people to face, understanding that it is going to require a degree of violence in order to achieve it. And I'm not talking about paramilitary groups here or terrorist organizations. I'm talking about a degree of violence. The police on a daily basis engage in a degree of violence. A society without violence does not exist, has never existed. And the phrase violence solves nothing, actually, pretty much everything has been solved by violence, one way or the other. Everything that's gone right in the world and everything that's gone wrong in the world has been dependent on who had a monopoly of violence, who was in control of the ability to enforce. Back to the, as I said, the King's Writ. How does the King's Writ run? Well, in practical terms, it's where he can enforce what he has said. He says it in court. He says it in his court before his peers, and then it goes out into the country. How far does the King's word carry? How far does the government's word carry? It carries ultimately, hopefully, and in a functioning society, it carries through the potential for violence rather than the actuality of violence. In other words, if one had a peaceful revolution, and a peaceful revolution is in fact possible, which is that, not likely, but possible, which is that such an overwhelming number of people want the same thing at the same time that it just becomes an irresistible force. And therefore, it just must be accepted, because if these people don't get what they want, there will be violence. And the only way to stop them from getting what they want is violence. And therefore, we are looking at either we give the people of this country what they want, or we have a civil war. And my optimistic view of it is that it might happen as a result of the reality on the ground being the native peoples of the various countries so overwhelmingly want it that the system must give it to them. And that's the peaceful solution. But behind it, whether one likes to admit it or not, must be the threat of it will turn violent. Nobody has to say that necessarily out loud. Nobody in the crowd making the demands has to say, we're like, this is what we're going to do if we don't get what we want. But it has to be a sense on both sides, a realization. The likelihood is that there will be at least some low-level violence. And there is a very real possibility throughout Western nations of civil wars all across, and I mean atrocious civil wars. And since Spain is the country of the hour, perhaps like in terms of the demographic question, in terms of the political question, yes, it may even at some point get so violent and so vicious that we have a replay of something on the scale of the destruction of the Spanish Civil War, or the degree of violence that the Spanish, and the degree of destruction. And then we have to rebuild from the ashes of that. One hopes it doesn't get that far. One hopes that it can still be done by a process of talk, conversation, persuasion, mass mobilization, maintaining the native culture within itself, maintaining the in-group identity of the peoples of the nations of Europe, and then at some point their willingness to demand, like literally demand change. But the democratic process, the main problem, the ultimate problem with the democratic process, because you'd say if the overwhelming number of people want something, well, they can just vote for it, can't they? They cannot. They cannot. They will lose the votes. They will hide the votes. They will burn the votes. Um, as early as 1960, it is on record that John F. Kennedy did not win that presidential election. Everybody accepts that now. Everybody accepts that's a historical fact. Richard Nixon won the election, but it was fixed. People saw, in Chicago in particular, people saw ballot boxes floating along the river. That's how openly stolen that election was. And very famously, and this is, again, it's on the record, it's not some conspiracy theory that you have to search the corners of the internet for, is Joseph Kennedy, who financed his son's campaign to become president and planned for him to become president, actually planned for his elder brother to become president, but he was killed during the Second World War, so that did not happen. But planned his presidency from the beginning, like literally from his childhood. He said, like he was asked, Joe, did you buy the election? And he said, I did. And and he was asked then Joe, why was it so close? And he said, I paid for a win, not for a landslide. And that was his straight up answer. And everybody went, yeah, that's the way it works. That's the way it works. So the will of the people is not expressed through the ballot box anymore. The will of the people is not expressed through Parliament anymore. The will of the people in Ireland through Dáil Éireann. So I would say I'm not a Democrat. I do believe that the will of the people must be enacted. But I do not believe that the system in place at the moment is capable anymore. First of all, it has no intention of trying, but I don't think it's even capable anymore of delivering through the democratic system the will of the people. And the will of the people must be carried out one way or the other. And the premier focus, the imperative, is the survival of the native people in their own homeland. That is the English people in England, the Irish people in Ireland, French people in France, and so on and so forth. And for that matter, I'm quite happy, but it's their own business to do this. I'm quite happy for the Nigerian people to survive in Nigeria. But let them make their own mistakes, let them make their own mess, whatever. That's
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like the most sustainable way for everyone to live is everyone having their own individual ethno-states. And historically, that's how it's always been. Obviously, what we're seeing right now is just a disaster, and we are being replaced in real time. And we have to be frank about this. It's only happening to Western countries. It's only happening to white countries, right?
yes, white people. Yeah. And we have to call it for what it is. It's white people. White people are the endangered species of humanity. And they are being deliberately targeted for destruction. And you can call it the Great Replacement. You can call it whatever you like. We are targeted for destruction. We are targeted for the end game. We are targeted to disappear. And it is no longer a question of Oh, well, it could happen in 100 years or it could happen in 200 years. Even these calculations, this is the thing back again to Kuwait again, and not to overstate one small example, but it's worth it in this. All the demographic studies which show that population will, they say the white English population will be a minority at such and such a date. All of those statistics are meaningless in the context of watching the swarm over the wall. They literally are meaningless because they are based on projecting past immigration patterns onto future developments and past birth rate patterns onto future generations. They do not allow for the camp of the saints scenario. They do not allow for a sudden overwhelming of one European state. Because if it happens to one European state, and to a certain extent what happened in Spain was a test. It was a test, and it was a test. I won't say this was a test that the Spanish people failed, but the Spanish government definitely failed it. And in the next very short few years, it will be a test of the Spanish people's resolve, because it will be a test of whether they are willing to remove not only the government, as in Pedro Sanchez, as an individual, but whether they are willing to root and branch remove the system which led to the situation where they were overwhelmed by on their own national territory by a group of people who could relatively easily have been repelled, but were not. If they have not got that resolve, then Spain will fall. If Spain doesn't have that resolve, France will fall. Italy will fall. I don't believe in this. I don't put up on X's like London has fallen, Britain has fallen. Nowhere has fallen yet, but we are falling. And the first country that goes under entirely. And when people talk about Andalusia, for example, when the Muslims controlled all of Spain and parts of southern France, again, it was a governmental control. The people were still Spanish. The people were still French. They had Islamic government. They did not have an Islamic population. And that's important because this time you cannot reverse demographics. You can reverse political structures. You can reverse occupation government. You can reverse financial systems even. But when the people who live there are no longer you, then you are over. And to think in terms of that it can never happen. It can never happen. I always go back to the example of the North American Indian, and I say he is the classic example of the people who said, first of the European settlers arrive in Jamestown. There's not very many of them, and they seem like nice people, and they probably were. And they seem like they keep to themselves and they're not causing any trouble. Everything will be fine. And anyway, look, it's a big place. There's room for everybody. Well, if you can find an Iroquois Indian today who still believes that immigration was a good idea, then I certainly would be interested in hearing his point of view on how the future of Europe can work in a racially integrated environment, because it didn't work for them. And it wasn't through any particular malice or evil by the settlers who arrived. It was through the fact that they simply arrived and they simply were there. And they were there, and there was more of them, and there was more of them, and there was more of them. And even if there wasn't malevolent political forces behind it, the same thing it would happen is demographics, destiny. When they're here in large numbers, they're coming in even larger numbers. And when they're here, they either need to be sent home, which is remigration, or there will be more of them and more of them and more of them until there isn't any of us. And that's it. And we will not be the first civilization that just goes under, that simply goes under. The idea that a civilization of the sophistication and power that the Western world once had cannot go under is a lie. It's a lie. The Aztec Empire went under. The Incan Empire went under. Empires go under. Civilizations can be destroyed until there's nothing left but historical artifacts for archaeologists to look at.
Yes. Like we were saying, if you see what happened in Zimbabwe or Rhodesia, the political power which white people had just got less and less and less, which eventually led to the farmers being slaughtered one by one, en masse. And then it becomes Zimbabwe, and the whole country starts to collapse, to which they beg for them to come back. We see it happening in South Africa right now. The numbers are only getting less and less. It doesn't take a genius to see what trend it's going to be taking. So how do you feel about the future? Do you have hope for the future, maybe?
As I said to you, I have 5 children under 10, and I have more children who are adults as well. I have to be, right? I have to be. But sometimes I think it's hope over experience. I'm optimistic. What's the phrase again? I can't remember who said it. Is optimism of the will, pessimism of belief. Which is that things are very, very bad, and there's no point in pretending they're not. So solutions to the problems we have are far more radical than anybody currently is willing to contemplate. The idea, for example, of a dictatorship, the idea of an aristocracy, the idea of national, which is what I believe in. The idea of that is a bridge too far for most people at this point. It needs to not be a bridge too far. They need to start thinking in terms of, if it's not particularly my political philosophy, and it's certainly not going to be me as a person who's going to take control of the Irish situation and turn the whole thing around. They need to think of something that is as radical, because it is that bad. And there is what I observe among the vast majority of the indigenous population of this country is still a degree of complacency, which does not give rise to a sense that there is the urgency or the radicalism that is required. So in that sense, I'm pessimistic. But on the other hand, I have to be optimistic, because the alternative to optimism is surrender. And surrender is not even surrender with terms anymore. Surrender means extinction. And extinction is not conceivable when you have young children. It's not conceivable. I don't care when I die. I've lived a reasonably decently long life. I'd prefer not to die anytime soon, mind you. All things taken together, I'd prefer, if I could have another 40 years, I'll take them. But if I don't get them, I'm okay. But I've got I've got a 3-year-old here. He hasn't had a life yet. And I would like him to have one. And he must have one. And I would like grandchildren. And that's almost inconceivable to me now, because it's so far away. That will require radical change that people are unwilling at, as of this moment, as far as I can see in any country, willing to accept. So there's going to have to be a major change in mindsets. But it has to happen because are, it's, it's either national survival or national extinction, racial survival, racial extinction. Is we don't, there is no middle ground anymore. For the Irish people, for example, there is no possibility of another 700 years of occupation. No, 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 it's not 700 years of occupation. It's 70 years till extinction. 70 years till extinction. So, and it's the same for England, it's the same for Britain, it's the same for France, it's the same for Germany, it's the same for the whole of Western Europe. It's the white man will either have recovered his will to live. That's literally what it is now. He will have recovered his will to live within the next 3 to 4 decades maximum and impacted that will to live, or he will be extinct within 70, completely extinct. Or maybe we'll be running casinos on reservations. I don't know. That's the optimism of the average liberal, to be honest, played out. Is we'll live on reservations and we'll run casinos for, I don't know, Ugandans or something to come in and
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because people complain about us and, we're evil, we're slave traders, we're colonizers. Still, we're nice enough to obviously give people like the Indians their reservations to which they can do anything with. I'm very confident in saying we will not get the same treatment when in that position. And I get all the time liberals kick off in the comments. So I invite them onto the show to discuss it. And it's like, if we're getting this much hostility when we're the majority, do people seriously expect that when we're the minority, suddenly all that hostility just goes away and we're going to be, treated like everyone else? We can finally get our charities. We can kind of look after ourselves. We can get all this state funding, DEI. Obviously not. Obviously not. And that's the thing. Like we say, demographics is destiny. Once we're gone, we are gone. And I truly believe there won't be any other society which has been as benevolent as ours.
yes, yeah, it's just we will just be an ecosystem. There will be there's no civilization to replace us. There's no because even the closest to what we have created in the West, China's birth rate is tumbling, and China's geopolitical power may be advancing. China's geopolitical ability to influence world events is increasing. But again, demographics is destiny. Their birth rates are dramatically below replacement level, which means that in the long run they face the same problem: is extinction. So what? Take a look at, because whatever the consequences of colonialism in the past, it is no longer good enough. It's the same way as it's no longer good enough for an Irishman to say, it's England's fault. Oh, maybe at, like, obviously under British rule, yeah, it's England's fault. Maybe for 10, 20 years after we gained independence, well, there were structural problems that were inbuilt that we could do nothing about yet, and so on. 100 odd years down the line, no, there's no more excuse anymore. So Africa is what Africa can create. There's no point in blaming colonialism. There's no point in blaming the British and the French or the Belgians, as they do, for why they're in the state they're in. They're in the state they're in because they're in the state they're in because that's what they are capable of creating. The whole world is going to be Africa, basically. Global Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless things change, we are definitely heading for global Zimbabwe. It's not even up for debate, right? It's just the writing's on the wall. And if we don't change quick, that will be our fate. But yeah, listen, Justin, I've really enjoyed this. Is there anything that you want to plug if people want to reach out to you? What's the best way?
Just that people would go to their website, clonairn.ie, and have a look at who we are, what we maybe follow my X account. I'm trying to modernize myself not to say Twitter anymore, though younger people than me keep saying Twitter, so I can get away with it for a while longer. And I have a Telegram account. Clonairn has a Telegram account. Clonairn has a X account as well. And for the Irish diaspora in England to get involved, like directly, they can help us, and we shall speak again, I imagine.
Yes, yeah, and also something which is important, and like I can't even tell you how many times I get this. People will directly message me. People will tag me in this stuff. People will comment on all my videos saying that we need a crusade tomorrow. But please, please understand this isn't helping the situation. I get you're upset. I get you're angry. I'm angry too. But running off pure emotion isn't going to help anyone. We are dealing with something which has been well planned. We're dealing with something which has been well thought out. Realistically, we need to do the same things. We need to be organized. If you cannot find a way to channel your emotions, to channel the anger correctly, we will lose. So all that emotion is essentially it's useless if not used effectively. On top of that, we all know when we do work together, when we all actually use our heads, there is nothing that can't be achieved. And history proves that, right? Fortunately, we have places, we have people like Justin here. We have people like Mark Collette in the UK. We have the Woodlander Initiative. We have Return to the Land. We have Patriot in the US. There are options, and a lot of people are waking up to this. It's important to remember you aren't alone because so many people are already on it, because so many people had the foresight to realize they need to start building something now. So please reach out to people like Justin here. And if you are watching, please share this to other people who might be Irish, who haven't seen it yet, because these are practical things we need to be doing right now. Anyway, Justin, thank you so much for your time.
And thank you, Larry. Thanks very much. And we'll talk again, as I said.
So if you've made it this far, first of all, thanks very much. If you're watching on YouTube, please remember to comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're watching on Spotify, please be sure to give it a 5-star review. The full uncensored version of this episode can be found on Substack and Substack alone. Both YouTube and Spotify require censorship. However, Substack doesn't. With one YouTube already taken away, it's only a matter of time before it happens again. On top of that, with the Substack, we'll be doing live Q&As, talks with some of the biggest voices in this space, and a chance for you to ask the questions you want answering. Head over to Substack now for only £5 a month. I'll leave a link for this in the bio below. Cancel anytime. Thanks for watching this week's episode, and I hope to see you next time. All the best.